I'm delighted to welcome you all here to Queen's as the first director of Campbell UK and Ireland. What I'd like to do in this short presentation is say a little bit about the Campbell Collaboration, just to provide a bit of background, set the scene, something about the Campbell UK and Ireland Centre and what we hope to achieve with what we do, and in that discussion as well, just something about why we're doing it. Why are we interested in systematic reviews? Why are they so important to the work that we do in our research areas? So that's really the plan, and that will provide a context then for our eminent speakers who will be following, talking around the actual use of systematic reviews in a number of different policy areas. But if we start really then with the Campbell Collaboration, and you'll see just from this sort of short overview that we are an international network, voluntary, non-profit, independent, which is absolutely critical to what we do, network of researchers internationally. And our focus is pretty simple, it's to produce systematic reviews. And for those of you who may not be aware, a systematic review is really an authoritative statement on the quality and current evidence base for particular interventions, for policies, for sets of policies, for programmes in a particular area. So if we're looking at education, for example, and we're interested in what should be done to reduce bullying and victimisation, a systematic review, and we've got one in the Campbell Library, we'll look at all of the international evidence, we'll do a thorough search, bring the evidence together, assess the quality of that evidence, synthesise it, and give an authoritative statement on what the evidence tells us about approaches to reducing bullying in schools. So they are what we call systematic reviews, and certainly this is at the heart of what we do as a Campbell Collaboration. If any of you are aware of Cochrane, the Cochrane Collaboration, then we sometimes would say we're the sister organisation of Cochrane, and what we do is we do systematic reviews for the social sciences, whereas Cochrane would do that work in health. For ourselves then, we have 6 coordinating groups who really take the work forward for the Campbell Collaboration internationally. 4 in substantive areas, crime and justice, education, international development and social welfare, and 2 cross-cutting coordinating groups that really sort of take a focus on enhancing and taking forward skills in terms of methods and methodological approaches to our work at Campbell, and also knowledge translation and implementation. So that's a very quick overview of the Campbell Collaboration internationally. Where do we fit in then with our new centre here? Well, we're the first national centre of the Campbell Collaboration. So Campbell UK and Ireland, we're established by the Centre for Evidence and Social Innovation here at Queen's, who will also host the centre, but the centre will be and is a national centre of the Campbell Collaboration. And our focus is also pretty simple. It's to work across the UK and Ireland to encourage the greater production of Campbell reviews and their greater use in decision making in terms of policy and practice. So the question really then is, if that's what our focus is, why is that important? Why are we so interested in systematic reviews? And that really takes us a step back, because systematic reviews can be of a range of different types of evidence, but our primary focus in Campbell is on trials. So we need to take a step back to ask, well, why are we interested in randomised controlled trials, and then summarising the evidence from those trials in relation to particular policy areas. But why we need randomised trials really takes us back to the heart of what do we mean by evidence, and what do we mean by effectiveness. So, of course, in terms of evidence, there's different types of evidence, using different methods, addressing different types of research questions. So randomised controlled trials address one specific research question, but address it really effectively. And that is a question about the effectiveness of particular interventions, policies or programmes. So the question that we're interested in here, primarily, is the effectiveness of public and private services. What impact do they have on the lives of those that they're targeting? Do they actually reach and make a genuine, measurable change in the lives of children, parents, families, or whoever the service is targeted at. And the problem is that we all know of many, and we can all remember many evaluations which have taken place over the years of services, of policies, of interventions. Evaluations will often focus on outputs. So we'll get a really good report at the end of a funding regime of a particular service, of what was spent, what was created, what was put into place, how many people went through that service, received it. There'll also often be qualitative or maybe even surveys of people's views on that service. Did they like it or not? Did it fit in with their daily activities and routines? Did it give them what they wanted? But in terms of actual effectiveness, at the very best, many of these evaluations will focus simply on asking people whether they thought it was effective. Do you think this service that you've received has made a difference? Yes or no? And what we know, of course, is that what people think isn't always what happens in reality. And what we are lacking from traditional evaluations of services is a very critical focus on the actual measurable change that something has actually had. So if we've got a reading programme in schools or a crime prevention strategy in local neighbourhoods, of course we need to understand how it's been experienced, what people's views of it are, the actual process, elements to its delivery. But critically, in terms of public funding and responsibility, we also need to know, very basically, whether it works. Does it actually lead to measurable change? And this is where randomised controlled trials are so important. And as the name suggests, there's three elements to them: randomised, controlled and trials. So we need to have trials. We need to actually have measurable and generate measurable evidence of whether a particular intervention is leading to a change or not. So at the very basic level, we need some measure of where the children or the parents or whoever the service is were at the beginning of the programme, and then we need to see how they've progressed to the end. Has there been a change? But what we also know is that there are many different reasons why people change. And in school, particularly for young children, they develop naturally. So even if a school was having no impact, children would still get better at reading. So we need a control group as a second element. We need to sort of look at how do children change, if it's education, those receiving the service, compared to what would have happened anyway. So that's a control group of children, very similar, and see how they track over the year. And the big question for us is, those that receive the intervention, do they change above and beyond what would have happened anyway? And if there is a difference, we'd like to believe that that difference was down to the intervention. But that assumption rests upon the idea that we're comparing like with like. So this is why it's critical that we have matched intervention and control groups. And the most robust way of doing that is through randomisation, where if we have a sample of children, we randomly separate them into one group to get the intervention, one group to act as a control group. Or if we're working on school-based initiatives, for example, we might recruit 60 or 70 primary schools and randomise the schools. And that'll be a cluster randomised control trial. But the whole idea is that the randomisation, by default, will create two matched groups. And all of the things that will influence the outcomes we're interested in, whether it's children's reading or reduction in crime rates, will happen across the sample, will be balanced across the two groups. And it's then, when we have a randomised controlled trial, can we look at the evidence and then be more authoritative in our conclusions, that for that sample, what we find, if there's an improvement in the intervention group compared to the control group, because they are matched, because they're randomly assigned, we know that there's no systematic differences between them other than one group's got the intervention and one hasn't. On that basis, then, we can be pretty confident that any change or difference between the groups at post-test will be down to the intervention itself. So that's a randomised control trial, and there are detractors, the people that say you can't do trials. That's all well and good in medicine, in laboratories, but in the real world, in schools, in communities, in social service settings, you just can't do this type of work. And we haven't got a time today to go through the response to that, other than to say that our centre, the Centre for Evidence and Social Innovation, has shown that we can do that type of work. We've done over 50 trials to date, in a wide range of settings, many of them in education, but also in early childhood settings, home-based interventions, social care-based interventions, public health interventions. So we can and have done many randomised controlled trials. So they can be done. But here's where we now link into systematic reviews, because our experience of doing trials, very important though it is, does raise concerns. And they raise concerns, one-off trials. We may be able to generalise to the particular sample that we've been researching for that randomised trial, but there's difficulties generalising from that particular trial to the population as a whole. And one of the problems is that we can't just take the results of a randomised trial undertaken in New York and assume that those findings will be equally applicable to here in Belfast or in Cairo or anywhere else in the world. So there's an issue that even if we have the highest possible method of evidence of a randomised controlled trial, it can only be applicable to the sample that it's focused on. But there's also another problem, because in the end we've taken a sample. And if we do exactly the same trial again with another group of people taken from the same population, we probably won't get exactly the same findings, because we're dealing with different people, and randomly people just differ a little bit. And our random selection and our distribution of people to control and intervention groups will have an impact. So there's also an issue that for each individual trial, important though they are, and they are the bedrock of systematic reviews, they are limited as single trials. And to understand this, I just want to show you what's called a forest plot for people that are aware. But this is from one of our Campbell reviews, and I'm using this one because it was a precursor to us doing a randomised controlled trial of a mentoring volunteer tutoring programme in schools here in Northern Ireland. We did two randomised trials over a couple of years, one involving 800 primary school children and a follow-up one a couple of years later involving 500 across 50 different schools. But we were interested before we started in terms of looking at what does the evidence tell us so far. And this summarises the evidence. It's from a Campbell systematic review. Because it's a Campbell review, you can be sure that there's been an absolutely thorough search that's taken place, all absolutely set out before it starts and peer-reviewed, so that we know exactly and we can repeat the process again and find the same studies. Quality criteria are applied in terms of the levels of evidence we need to be included in the review. And what you can see here is a number. And I should have, before I started my presentation, counted them. I'm going to guess about 20-odd studies which were found to be eligible, which were randomised controlled trials. And each row is a study. And you'll see the names of the authors down the left-hand side. The key thing for you to look at, though, is those little dots. And those dots represent the mean effects found. And unless you've got great eyesight, you probably can't read it, but there's 5 little vertical lines going down. The middle vertical line is 0. So if a dot appears on that vertical line, that means the overall effect was 0. The control and intervention group were the same at post-test as they were at pre-test. And so for that trial, it found no change. And then any dots to your right-hand side show change in favour of the intervention group. So the further the dots are away from that middle line, that shows you the bigger the effect, the bigger the difference between the intervention and control group at post-test. But equally, any dots to the left of that line show actually that there was a reverse difference, that actually outcomes for the intervention group getting the volunteer tutoring were less at post-test compared to the control group. Now what we do with meta-analysis, and you'll hear a lot more about this in the training over the next couple of days, but we have methods for synthesising that evidence, because what you have is all different samples, but you have a huge pooled sample. And there's methods for pooling that data in a robust, statistically appropriate manner, and to create an average effect size. And you can see right at the bottom there's a diamond there, and that's the average effect size of volunteer tutoring. And it shows you it's to the left, to the right of the 0 middle line, and it shows you that overall volunteer tutoring has a small but a positive effect for pupils. Now, why have I gone through all of that? Well, because when we come back to the key point about relying on individual trials, what you can see here, and we can count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of these trials actually had negative effects. The dots are on the left hand of the zero. All of those other lines are confidence intervals. All of those show that those effects were not statistically significant, but nevertheless, they were on the wrong side of the line. And what you'll see is that hardly any of the studies came up with the same effect size at the end. They all had slightly different effect sizes. This is the random variation when you take another sample and another sample. Also the variation when you do the same volunteer tutoring programme, but with different communities in different contexts. There's a whole range of reasons why the findings of a particular trial may not be applicable directly to other populations. The point then is that each individual trial produces really important evidence, but on its own, it's susceptible to providing misleading results. And one of our concerns in the Centre for Evidence and Social Innovation is that some of the trials that we've done have become high-stakes trials. Government has funded a trial on a particular programme. That programme is seen as a flagship one, and future funding will rely upon the findings of one trial. And findings of one randomised controlled trial is far better than having no findings of any randomised controlled trials, but you can see the concerns that we have. If we rely solely on one trial to make big judgments about a particular intervention or approach, then there's a danger. And so for us, in our centre, why we are absolutely committed to carrying on doing randomised controlled trials, we're also absolutely committed to understanding the need for evidence synthesis, for actually understanding the results of individual trials within the context of a broader international evidence base. And that's one of the main reasons that we're committed to establishing and hosting the Campbell Centre and are very proud of our relationship with the Campbell Collaboration. And we see it as one of our missions, not just to increase the number of trials, primary trials that are taking place across the UK and Ireland, but also increasing the number of systematic reviews that are taking place and their better use as well in policy and decision making. So we've talked a little bit about our experience in the Centre for Evidence and Social Innovation here at Queen's, and hence why we need systematic reviews. And what you'll see if you look at the Campbell Collaboration website and browse the library, you'll have a good look at the range of different reviews that have been taking place in education, social welfare, crime and justice, international development. But you'll also see, whilst there's very different topics that have been focused on, you'll see a uniformity in terms of the methods that are being used, the transparency of what's being done, the objectivity of what's been done, the robustness of the systematic reviews themselves. And there's three sort of key points here. If we're going to be convincing in terms of systematic reviews, we need to have an approach which is open, which is transparent, which is objective. So before we go out searching for evidence, we need to set out clearly what our methods are going to be, and we need to have that subject to peer review, so we can stand over what we've done. And we do need to have comprehensive searching. We'll all know of literature reviews which have claimed to be exhaustive literature reviews and yet really have just been cherry-picking a small number of studies, often then reflecting people's own political concerns. So one of the hallmarks of a systematic review, of a Campbell review, is that it is objective, it is thorough. There are clear methods for identifying all eligible studies internationally in a particular topic, and all the criteria set out before we start and approved. And then thirdly, we have to be extremely balanced and careful in how we interpret the findings of systematic reviews. So not just will you find in all of our Campbell reviews an outline of what the overall evidence is in terms of the effectiveness or otherwise of a particular intervention, but you'll also find very clear guidance on how to interpret that and on the evidence, the quality of the evidence that underpins it. And often, unfortunately, our conclusions are that we need more evidence, that the actual quality of the evidence that we've had to deal with hasn't been as strong as it should have been. But you'll also see a range of sensitivity analyses. So rather than just taking the headline finding of an effect when we pool data, We scrutinise that by looking at the intervening effects of a whole range of different variables before we come down with an overall view. So, that's the Campbell Collaboration. That's the overall view of what we are as a national centre, supporting the generation and use of Campbell reviews in the UK and Ireland, something on why we feel that is critical. And now finally, just want to set out what our plan is for the next 3 years. We're going to develop and finalise and have approved through Campbell Collaboration a sort of a action plan, strategic plan for this national centre. But you can see our key priorities. First and foremost, we need to start to develop strategic networks. We already have many of those through our work as a centre of evidence and social innovation, but there are a number of like-minded organisations and individuals across the UK and Ireland committed to evidence-based policy and practice, to promoting that in a range of different disciplines. And so we need, in the first part of our work, to really sort of reach out to and build those alliances, and to play a key role as part of a broader collaboration across the UK and Ireland in terms of the evidence movement. But secondly, we need to focus on capacity building. If we're going to want more people to do systematic reviews, then we need to ensure that they are trained appropriately in the techniques of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So we're offering complementary training here at Queen's tomorrow and Friday, but we're going to be developing that training and offering it in partnership with institutions across the UK and Ireland in some of the major cities over the next few years. There's going to be a rolling plan of training which we will support across the UK and Ireland. Thirdly, though, we need to also raise the profile of existing Campbell reviews. And you'll see at the back on the left, do have a look before you leave, of a number of plain English summaries of Campbell reviews that are in existence already. And please take some of those away with you. But what we need to do is to get out a lot more. So some of the main conferences, whether sort of professional-based education, social work, or subject-based sociology, psychology, public health, we need to be out there, we need to have stalls, and we need to be promoting the reviews that already exist and increasing awareness of the Campbell Collaboration across the UK and Ireland and the work that we do. So that'll be another priority for us over the next few years. Fourth, though, and really our main raison d'etre, is that we need to be producing systematic reviews. So we need to find mechanisms to increase the number of systematic reviews that are taking place internationally, but our focus is particularly to work with colleagues here nationally in the UK and Ireland. And there are models for that. We've started doing that now at Queen's. As an academic, we've sort of led the way now in terms of there's a couple of PhD studentships full-time, and their focus is a systematic review and meta-analysis. And we need to work with colleagues across universities in the UK and Ireland to encourage more of that type of activity. And others that are doing focused applied research, but part of that will involve a smaller systematic review. So there's a lot we can do within our existing resource envelope of higher education, of research institutions and universities across the UK and Ireland. But we also need to be finding funding which we can then use to support research teams on these islands to do systematic reviews. And we've got some examples of doing that already at an international level. In terms of the Campbell Collaboration, we've got very generous grants from the Smith Richardson Foundation, from the Jacobs Foundation. They trust the Campbell Collaboration internationally in terms of the quality and independence of what we do. They've given grants to the Campbell Collaboration to administer, to then put out calls for teams to bid to do systematic reviews and to be funded to do reviews in particular areas. And we believe that there's opportunities for us to enhance that now in the UK and Ireland. There are funders nationally we can be talking to who need high-level evidence in particular areas related to what they do. And we need relationships like that where we can hold funding but then advertise and have an open competition. Not that Queen's will be doing most or even the majority of those, but we'll be sharing those out across the UK and Ireland. But critically, all of those reviews will be run through the editorial processes of the Campbell Collaboration. So there's many ways that we need to start working creatively in terms of looking at how we could develop the number of systematic reviews that are taking place in the UK and Ireland. And it takes us back to the first point, which is really beginning with our strategic networks, building coalitions, having conversations with key partners to look at what opportunities exist. And then finally, alongside the production of systematic reviews, we do need to work with regional governments, national governments, with policymakers, service providers, to actually really carry on promoting and banging the drum in terms of the better use of evidence in decision making. And that's where the coordinating group in Campbell around knowledge translation and implementation is going to be very important to supporting our work here in the UK and Ireland. But we need to carry on having those conversations. And there's a lot of good foundations to build upon, but there's a lot more work that we need to do in that regard. So that really is a snapshot of the Campbell Collaboration, the National Centre, which we're now launching today, why we're focused on systematic reviews, and what our work is for the next 3 years as a starting point. Finally, what I'd like to do is to encourage you to visit our website. Hot off the press, if that doesn't actually work when it's a website, but hot on the press, it's new, it's a new website, very recently gone live. You can see the link there. And you'll see this website will grow over the years. Many of the links to the website are through our website straight into the Campbell Collaboration, to the Campbell Library, to the coordinating groups. But what you'll see as our activities start to develop, you'll be able to come here to find out information on training events that we're organising nationally, on meetings and other events, and where we're going to be appearing in terms of stalls and exhibitions as well. And we'll have we need to set up arrangements, and we'll have to agree these with the Campbell Collaboration about how we organise ourselves as a centre, but we would want to have this as a network. We want to be able to draw people together. So everybody who's interested in doing high quality systematic reviews are able to join and be part of what we're establishing nationally. So I hope that makes sense. I really do believe that you're going to find a lot in these next few presentations from leading people from the Campbell Collaboration internationally, who are going to give you a real taste for some of the work that's been going on in terms of evidence synthesis in different areas and the importance of it. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over now to our speakers, but thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this afternoon's work. Thank you.